Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Samantha Hoyte. I'm an audit manager here at Withum out of the East Brunswick office, and I'm joined today with Amy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Both. I am also out of the East Brunswick office, spent some time also in the Red Bank office, and I am a manager within the nonprofit niche.
Okay, and today we'll be going through some best practices for effective governance and risk management.
Okay. So just kind of an outline of today's discussion. We're going to understand the role of board governance policies. We're going to talk about reviewing and improving upon current governance policies. And then Sam's going to take over and she's going to talk about identifying various potential risks in an organization and developing plans or processes to address potential risks that's been identified. Okay. So the first thing we kind of want to talk about is, what's the objective of a board member and the board itself? So it's to create and set strategic objectives. So those are specific, measurable goals that want to be achieved while carrying out the mission that you want to accomplish. You're going to create policies to assist in meeting those strategic objectives. The board is going to serve as matter experts. And in this situation, you're kind of looking for a very, diversified board if you can. You have things that can bring, experiences and knowledge to the table. Say a lawyer, an accountant or CPA. I've had clients who do a lot of construction, so they've had architects on their boards. You really find what fits for your entity at that point. You're going to serve as a sounding board for the chief executive of the organization, and you're going to assist in hiring that chief executive and monitor their progress throughout, the year in their term, meeting those objectives that have been set. You're going to set governance processes and assess performance, again, in those meeting those objectives. You're going to assume responsibility for the organization's compliance with laws and regulations. And also, if you have funding agreements or grant agreements, you're also going to assume responsibility for those. We're going to talk about risk management. Again, that's an objective of the board, and Sam's really going to get into the detail of that. And the board is also responsible for the management of the treasury. Ultimately, that relies with the board. How are you spending? What are your policies? What are your reserves? And the last piece is the mitigation of liability for both the organization, the board, and its members. Obviously, sometimes bad choices are made, but as long as the board's being, attentive, diligent, and thoughtful when acting within the policy, usually, those are fine decisions then. Okay. Next one. So a board has three types of responsibilities: strategic, legal, and fiduciary. And we're going to kind of get into the details of each one of those. But those are really what, the responsibility falls under. So the first one are the strategic responsibilities. And the first one really relates to the mission of the organization. The board's going to be responsible for developing a mission statement, something that's simple, it's action-oriented, and it really explains to, the board, funders, outside people, what's your purpose? It's really what you're going to use to guide yourselves. It's going to say why the organization exists, what you hope to accomplish, and the activities you're going to undertake, from where and from whom to meet that mission. You're going to help the organization achieve its mission, and then you're going to set and oversee the strategic objectives implemented to fulfill the mission. And that's really kind of the most important thing is, how are we going to do what the organization set out to do? Those strategic objectives need to be specific, measurable goals that the organization really hopes to achieve. Your strategic plan is really, it's going to come together really with all of your objectives. You're going to create specific business strategies. You're going to implement them and evaluate them on the success of the strategic objectives. And this should be conducted on a regular basis. Usually annually, you may say, or quarterly say, hey, where are we in these objectives? What do we need to adjust? And it's really separate from the regular responsibilities of the board. I know a few of the organizations that I do audits with or that I sit on boards, this is actually a separate committee, a strategic plan committee, and they kind of set these ideas. And really the key there is, evaluating, are we getting the desired results, that we set out to get? Do we need to modify our plan? And again, sometimes with the strategic plan, you might have short-term goals, you might have long-term goals. what's our 5-year plan? What do we plan to accomplish in a year? Do we need a capital plan, for new fixed assets? Those type of items might go into a strategic plan. And the last piece of this is your chief executive. You're going to be responsible for hiring and evaluating the chief executive, who's really ultimately responsible for the organization. And you're going to use a comprehensive list of qualities that you really want this person to hold. You're going to support them, you're going to supervise, and then, like we said, evaluate them. You need to maintain a level of independence and professional skepticism, which we obviously use with all of our audits when evaluating their performance. And your evaluation is really going to be on, did they meet those qualities that you were looking for, and really how are they interacting within the strategic plan and their role. Okay, Sam. Sam, on a flip, please. Next slide. There it goes. Thank you. So legal responsibilities really kind of get broken into subcategories. So the first responsibility is what we call the duty of care. And it's really, the way you conduct affairs within the organization. You want to act obviously within good faith, as a prudent person would. Would somebody outside make the same decision as they see it? And again, in a similar situation, you want to be aware of the organization's activities and mission. Obviously, that's the purpose of the organization and why you're on the board. And this is the key. You want to actively participate in meetings, especially when decisions are to be made. Again, everybody's bringing something to the board, whether it's your experience, your knowledge, and if you're not actively participating, then they're not getting the use out of those roles that you bring to the table. And participation isn't just speaking up in a meeting, but it's also reading, evaluating the reports and minutes and decisions that come out. I've been on boards where I know members aren't really reading, the packets or the consent agenda, and it really doesn't add anything if there's not that conversation from those, or they're really seeing what's going on. And again, a key is that you want to ensure that the organization has sufficient resources, to meet the mission of strategic objectives. This could be money. I know a lot of organizations and people are fighting for talent and people. That might be a resource that you don't have. Is, do they have the right equipment that's necessary? So again, resources don't always relate to just, money alone. Next slide. So then the second one is duty of loyalty. So the question is, really as simple as it is in the name, are you being loyal to the board, to the fellow members, obviously, and to the organization? You need to put the organization's needs above your personal one. Never use information that you obtain as a member of the board, obviously for personal gain. And you want to be transparency with any conflict of interest. And we're going to get into conflict of interest a little bit more in depth and provide you some tools on that. And conflicts of interest can be financial or non-financial. We're going to share ideas or opinions or advice. You're there for a reason. You bring something to the board, and that advice is obviously, why you're there. Represent the organization in a favorable image. I know we all say we don't want to end up on the front page of the newspaper, for something like that. It gets more like probably the internet now. But again, would somebody see you doing something favorable as you're representing the organization? Okay. And the last piece, duty of obedience. So you want to be faithful, obviously, to the mission of the organization. You don't want to act inconsistent with the mission, and you really want to ensure compliance with laws, regulations, funding agreements, and the organization's plans and policies. These would be the organizational documents. And again, these policies were set up to enforce the mission, to meet the goals of that mission. So you would want to follow those. Okay. Okay, polling question number 1. A board member, oh, sorry, go on, you can do it.
A board member has 4 types of responsibilities, true or false? We are just about halfway with people voted. Give it about 5-10 more seconds. About 80%. Get those last ones in, give it a couple more seconds, and I'm gonna close it out. And we got 83% said true and 18% said false.
Okay, unfortunately, the minority has it here. It is false. There are only three, strategic, legal, and fiduciary. We've only covered two, so we're going to get into the third one next. I think, Sam, you have to share again.
All right, let me stop it and
That's okay.
there you go. Is it up now?
It is there. We're good. Thanks. So the last piece of it is the fiduciary responsibilities of the board. And that's really, first part is the obligation to act obviously in the best interest of the organization. So you're going to protect the property, the financial assets, obviously, and the reputation of the organization. You're going to set policy and evaluate those policies. And again, we speak of the conflict of interest here. But those policies can also be investment policies, debt policies, anything that really helps with the mission of the organization and protects the organization. You're going to approve budgets, most commonly annually. It could be a capital budget, it could be an operating budget, fundraising, any type of budget, that's necessary. And then again, with the treasurer, you might evaluate those budgets. Are we meeting them? Do we need to adjust them? But those are the items there. And you're going to really review and analyze financial information. I know there's always an interest of, I'm not really a financial person. I don't really know how to analyze this. But we are going to talk about, the minimum in a few minutes the board should be able to do and understand. And really, why do you want to really review and analyze that financial information? It's really the only way to ensure that the organization has the resources needed to fill its mission. And again, we've talked about that. It could be money, it could be, talent or people. Remains accountable to your donors and others. And obviously in most nonprofits and all, there's those donors and you remain accountable to them. There could be funders. So you really need to ensure that the information is accurate for that purpose. And really, ultimately the board should act as a policy setter, advisor, and really monitor the goals and plans to meet that mission. Next one.
Okay, we have one question here I was going to toss to you, Amy.
Sure.
So it is it a conflict for the president or CEO of an organization to be the supervisor of an employee of the organization, employee or employees of the organization?
I think you see that as common. There's people that work under the president and CEO of the organization. I've had that. I don't know if there's a relationship to the president and CEO, say marital or family. I would think that might be more of a conflict of interest. But I have seen, those before. Sam, do you have any other?
Yeah, usually I find a lot of that, it depends on the size of the organization too. Some of the smaller ones, it's just the size. So there's no way really around it. And even in the larger ones, the president, CEO, they still have a level of supervisory, maybe not of all the employees, for employees of a certain level, but they still have that role. So that's not really a conflict per se. I mean, there should still be appropriate segregation of duties to help for oversight, and the board should still be reviewing what the president CEO is doing.
Yeah, I think to add to that point too, as you're talking, sometimes the president and CEO of the organization may be part of the board because they're an employee of the organization, but they don't always have a voting right at the board, but they're considered part of the board. So Again, that's another type of control where, they're not voting on the policies, but they're also, kind of involved in the setting or making decisions. Good question. Appreciate the question. So best practices to meet those responsibilities that we've talked about. I think a key here is minutes need to be kept of every meeting and committee. And Sam's probably had it too. We go into audits and we're like, we had this meeting, and they were like, where's the minutes? And there's no minutes. You really want that documentation. It's your protection of, this is what happened. These are the policies we decided on. Here's how we voted. Here's who didn't vote. So it's really every decision that's made by the organization is reflected in that. A key to that too is listing the voting and those that abstain from voting. I would say committee minutes are sometimes a little more lax than say the board minutes. But if you have a meeting, it's a committee or a board, you really should have those. Obviously, whoever, first approves it, the second, all the favors, the nays. And then really the abstentions are really a big part of it, because that's a lot of your conflict of interest will come into abstaining on those type items. And I would say, with those minutes, make sure that if you have closed sessions, that they're noted and addressed. Again, don't talk about all the little stuff, but the big approvals and policies need to be in there. I have, clients where the minutes are a page, and I have ones that are, 12 pages. So it's really, again, making sure the decisions themselves and those items that are action voted on are included. Again, board members, you really, in a perfect setting, would prefer to have a diverse skill set and background of people. And those are really for what your organization's mission is. And you want to find those people that help your organization. If you're a health organization, you may want more people in the medical field. If you're more of a, mental health, you might want people in that area. So again, you find that set, but if you can have an attorney on the board, I know a lot of clients kind of rely on those attorneys to help them with, small things that may arise and questions and policies and forms. So they don't have to, hire an attorney. You have a CPA, it gives you a little bit more credential on, financial reporting. So you really kind of fit the skill set and background to be diverse, but to meet your organization's needs. And you want somebody that's passionate about the mission. If they don't believe in the mission, they're not going to really go all out to support it. So you want to find that person, that wants to help. Maybe they have some family connection to the organization or to what your mission is, whether it's family, friends, or maybe they just, feel passionate about it and something that they like to do, or it's their pastime, something to definitely consider. And as we talked about, you don't have to have an accounting or financial background. And we're going to kind of discuss, the minimums that somebody who may not be, accounting savvy or financially savvy can, use. And a key here is really providing people a written description of their position expectations. It's no different than in employment. The more you tell people exactly what their expectations are up front, what their job entails, they're much more responsive to, meeting those demands, or at least understanding them and questioning them. Okay. Yeah. All right. Next one, please.
Sorry, I was muted. We do have one question on conflict of interest, but I'm going to defer at this time because I know we have a present further down in the slides. We're going a little bit more detail in that. Okay. So I asked the questioner that once we get there and we cover that, we'll revisit if your question has been covered.
Okay. So best practices to meet the board responsibilities. The one thing we kind of recommend is, have an orientation for incoming members. You may consider also having one for returning members. Maybe they're all together. You just have orientation, board orientation, or maybe you want to do theirs separately. And in this meeting, you want to have, discuss the organization's mission. Again, everything spaces around that mission. If the client, the board member doesn't understand the mission, we can't really meet the strategic plan to help it. You want to talk about an organization chart, kind of going back to the question, who supervises who, who's responsible for who, how many people are in the organization, just so they understand the flow of the information. At that time, it's a good time to review any of the bylaws, your most recent, say, 990, and then your board member responsibilities. If they have a fundraising obligation, I know some boards require a minimum fundraising amount. How often are you going to meet? What is their time commitment? meeting wise, maybe outside of that, and attendance requirements. And, again, this kind of goes back to that participation. The board's only as effective as people that are engaging and that are acting. Obviously everybody's there for a reason again. And if they're not attending the meetings, you're kind of losing that benefit from that person. So it kind of makes it a little bit easier if you have somebody, unfortunately, who doesn't attend often or, whatever, and you need to maybe remove them or from the board. Again, obviously things always come up. There's going to be meetings that you're not going to be able to make. But, this allows people to kind of understand, what's expected of them right out of the gate. Consider providing a resource book or to orientation. I listed a book there. I was given that when I first joined the board. It's a really quick read. It says an hour. I don't know if that's a little exaggeration, but it was pretty good. We read the book before, and then we kind of talked about what we found helped us understand our roles. But just kind of an idea, maybe something to look into. You're going to want to get a signed acknowledgement when you have this meeting. So that way there's never that contention of, I didn't know, what do we go over? Here's, the policy, the book. And it's a good, a reference for them to go back to. And like I said before, you can consider, including the long-term board members, keep them refreshed and engaged, especially if something's changed, the way you're structured, maybe your mission's changed, or your bylaws, definitely might want to include those longer-term members. Okay. So best practices, we talked about meetings per year. You don't want to have too many or too little. Obviously, if you have too many, you're just kind of meeting and people kind of become bored with it. If you have too little, nothing kind of gets done. The AICPA suggests really 4 per year, quarterly. I would say a lot of the boards that I have do meet monthly, but a good handful of them meet quarterly also. Ones I've been involved to seem to be more quarterly based. But again, it's a short period of time, 3 months. If anything came up that was drastic, you can always hold a special meeting via call or email. But 4 seems to be the most practice that I've seen. Board terms, think about considering adding some limits. If you do that, you're kind of replacing your board, keeps it energized, fresh, new, and you get all those new perspectives and expertise that you might have not had before. But if you are instituting limits, we always say, do some staggered terms. You don't want to lose, a third of your board every 3 years and not have that continuity and prevent that large turnover. I would say I've seen 3 years, 2 terms of 3 years. You kind of figure out what works for your organization. It also depends on your board size. I mean, there's boards that are 6 people and there's boards that are 26 people. So you kind of adjust that to what works best for your organization and the size of your board. Established committees. This kind of allows the full board to really focus on the higher level items of the organization and kind of delegates down some of these specific items. So for example, you might have an executive committee, the finance and audit committee, obviously, who would handle the audit, the financials, the I-90. Your governance might do your policies. Personnel would be the raises, employment, hiring, and termination. Strategic, we've kind of talked about. You might have a membership committee. They're responsible for, activities to get in more members and member pricing, your fundraising, your capital campaign, and program. And really, usually, you'll happen is, these executive committees would have their own set schedule. They'll meet, they'll have their own minutes, and you can do one of 2 things. They can provide a report, summary report at the board meeting. I've seen that, or they provide their minutes and it goes in a consent agenda that the board reviews prior to the meeting. So again, it depends on the size of your board, size of your activities, which structure works better for you. But either would be fine. Again, just want to know how you did it and make sure it was documented in your minutes.
I think you kind of answered this question just now, but I just want to highlight, we had one here saying, are minutes of committee meetings required for all meetings or just when the committee is empowered to act on the matter for the board?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, if you're going to basically make decisions and policies, obviously, and then you're going to bring them to the board and you have the power. For example, a lot of times the audit committee will accept the report. I think you definitely need minutes in those situations. Does it hurt to have minutes for the other things? I would say no. especially if you're not bringing a presentation to the board and decisions are being made there or discussions are had. Does that kind of answer? Okay. That brings us to our next polling question. I think some of us feel like these dogs barely with their heads above water some days in COVID.
All right, polling question number 2. A conflict of interest policy should be, select 1, robust, offer protection, disclosed and reviewed by the board, or all of the above. All right, give it about 15 more seconds. About 75% have voted. All right, get those last minute votes in, and we're gonna close it out. And we have 95% all of the above and 5% disclosed and reviewed by the board.
So that was a little bit of an early question, but we did right. We did very well there. All the above is correct. And we're going to go through each of those pieces now on the conflict of interest policy. And hopefully answer that question, Sam.
Okay.
Okay. So we kind of, I've mentioned it several times, what is a conflict of interest? We've thrown out the terms there. So really a conflict of interest is really going to arise when you have a board member, they have some type of outside interest, role, or relationship, or outside activity influence, or what could appear to influence decisions, the organization, or provide a benefit. So these can be business interests, family relationships, friendships, political affiliations, volunteer activities, say positions on other boards. I have had clients where, we commonly say a board member happens to be the vice president of the bank where they do all their banking. I've seen clients where they are, like I said before, the architect, and they're doing a lot of projects where they go out to bid and they're the architect on the bid. Those type of items, it could be, I've had boards where they're intertwined, share members, and one is the father of somebody who's married to somebody else's daughter on the board. So again, as long as they're being disclosed and you're being transparent, usually, again, those are not an issue. But again, if it's some type of financial thing, you obviously would not want to vote on those type of policies if they're picking you, say, as the architect. There's potential for the board member, someone close to the board member, to have benefit or directly or indirectly. And the benefit could, say, lead to biased decision-making, some type of unethical behavior or appearance of. Those items really are the items that you would want to disclose as a possible conflict. Okay.
So I just wanted to mention here, because that's what that question, the other question we had was, which is, what are some situations where there would be a conflict of interest perceived between the organization and a board member? So for that one, you can reference the slide again where we give a couple examples of things to be aware of.
Okay. Okay. So some more to it. So one of the things that we recommend as a best practice is you want to create a conflict of interest policy that's really best for your organization or questionnaire. And we talked about this as in the question. You want it to be robust. You want it to offer protection both to the board member and to the organization, and be transparent. You need to be disclosed and reviewed by the board prior to any action being taken. And discuss, is this an issue to them being on the board in general? Can we get around it by them abstaining and not voting? And board members really involved in the conflict type interest, like I said, should really abstain from any final decision making that might involve them or appear to provide any benefit. And again, as we go back to the minutes, this is something you want to make sure to note in the minutes. When I've seen, clients whose maybe spouses are part of the investment team or something, you want to make sure that those names are there. I know from an audit perspective, we're going to make sure that they're abstaining. So you just want to document that. If you're following the right policies, you want to do that. In the handouts, we did drop a copy of what the AICPA has given to us as a tool for an actual non-conflict of interest policy. A lot of items in there. You would obviously be able to take that and tailor it to your organization. I think this is the best protection. I know on audits, we do go out and review these. It is a disclosure to the 990. So something definitely to consider, as a team. Okay.
All right, polling question number 3. Who is responsible for identifying potential risks in your organization, compliance and/or regulatory departments, internal audit, executive management, board of directors, or equivalent operational employees? We're just about halfway there, so give it about 15 more seconds. All right, let's get those last minute votes in, and I'm going to close it out. All right, we have 18% for compliance and regulatory departments, internal audit 3%, executive management 30%, board of directors or equivalent 40%, or operational employees with 10%.
So yeah, this is, I guess, a little bit of a trick question because everyone as part of the organization can help with identifying potential risks, but really and truly the person who ultimately bears that responsibility would be the executive management, as they kind of have the responsibility over the whole organization. They're the ones that have access to all the information, and even as the board selects them, the board still does have oversight. The board still has the ability to identify risk, but they're also going to be relying on information coming from the executive team that attends the meeting. So it's a little bit of a trick question, but yeah, still every department does have the ability to help identify these risks. So I'm going to go back and share my screen, and then we're going to move on. And if you can tell now who has a dog and who has a cat by who's speaking with these photos for the polling questions. So we're going to jump into kind of like the main potential risk that we see that kind of affects all organizations. Now, this is not a kind of catch-all. As you review your organization, there may be other things there that you need to factor in. But these are kind of the main things that we kind of see across the board in organizations. So, of course, there's theft. Almost everyone, whether not-for-profit, for-profit, everyone is concerned with theft. There's the misuse of assets. There's cybersecurity risk that wasn't there about 20 years ago. These are things now that we have to factor in. And of course, unidentified related party and conflicts of interest, which Amy just went through the different type of relationships. So I'm going to go through each of these 4 in a little bit more detail. First, we have theft. And this is my image of what I think when it comes to theft. But in your organization, theft can be internal, which we see a lot of times. You have employees submitting reimbursements. You may have a company card assigned to particular people. And those 2 areas are always very risky because there's always a temptation that someone can use them for their own personal needs. And how detailed then does someone review that credit card to see what it's being spent on? And there are a lot of companies now that, are professional and personal companies. For example, Staples is a common thing. I go to Staples. Pretty sure Withum shops at Staples. So when you have a company card and you get it and you see Staples, it's hard to sometimes uh, tell, like, is that a company or is it personal? So we do have to be very careful, of matching these things to make sure that the expenses being submitted on the card and for reimbursement were actually incurred on the behalf of your organization. There's theft of cash, which can be in multiple ways, whether it's, check, petty cash. If you have services where, maybe your clients are paying by cash for some fees, I've seen where, some people may take from that as well. Payment of personal bills similar to the credit card. If you're operating, most of us, in the New York area in particular, we have Con Edison bills. You know, that's your electric company. Well, it's the electric company for my house as well. So, if I'm paying a lot of bills, and especially if you're a larger organization, someone can easily slip their personal Con Ed bill in there. So again, that oversight in checking account numbers, service locations, that would come into play here. And then there's also to the double dipping of grant funds. So this is an area like if you have multiple grants and multiple sources, especially for reimbursement grants, someone may try to take an expense, submit it twice, get it from two sources. Now we have this excess income that they can draw on. So these are some of the internal ways that someone may try to steal money from your organization. But then there's also the external ways in which vendors may try to get money from the organization. Sometimes you have to be careful with double billing. A lot of times it's by accident that I see where, they send an invoice and maybe from the time you pay, they've sent a second one and it goes through and it gets processed twice and it's sent. And sometimes the vendors are not the one to catch it to say, hey, you paid us twice, I have to give you some money back. So that's a way that money can be taken from the organization. Billing without goods and services. It's very possible if you've dealt with a vendor all the time, you're accustomed to seeing that bill come across your table, it gets approved, it gets paid. Meanwhile, they actually didn't do any services for you. As far as the clients and customers that you're servicing, they could come in with fraudulent information as a way to receive your benefits when they're not in need of them or they don't meet the requirements that are needed. And of course, the newer one, again, like I said, last 20 years, we didn't have these issues as big as they are now, which is hackers. Like when the pandemic hit, I had a couple clients who hackers went in, stole their information, locked them out of the system. So that's definitely a prevalent thing that we see going on this time around. Okay. Next, we have misuse of company assets. So this one, again, we covered, you see again, that petty cash, the credit cards, similar for theft. A lot of these are going to repeat. But this is one that I find that, many people may think is not a major impact. For example, even like use of company property. If you have a company car that someone uses for business, but, they take it home, it's kept at their house, they use it to run errands. It may not be something of a big deal, but that's still a risk to you because if they get into an accident or anything happens, outside of operational hours, and that's your car with your name, your insurance, now your organization is at risk. Same thing with laptops. Laptops are a very big thing now, especially a lot of us are working from home. I know myself, Amy, we both have Withum laptops here, but to contract, do your personal business on work laptops. You might accidentally open something you're not supposed to open. Now all of a sudden you have a virus. So, or someone may be able to hack into the computer and now they have access to your organizational information because someone was doing personal business on a company laptop. And of course, using the resources that the company receives for their own personal goods. So, for example, if you received funding in order to feed the homeless, for example, and you have a contract with a provider that gives you discounted on ingredients to make your meals, but then, your employees are taking home the excess for their grocery shopping. So, again, that's misuse because those are intended to service your client base. So you're not going to be able to serve as much as you would like to if your staff is helping themselves to what is there as well. So this is another way again that a potential risk is out there that can be harmful to your organization. Moving on, cybersecurity. Now we do actually have a cybersecurity division that can come in and analyze your current setup to see where there's any risk areas, because the common person like myself, I am not very big when it comes to cybersecurity computers. I've actually had my personal information stolen a couple times, so it's highly annoying. So I could just imagine on a larger scale when it comes to organization, especially not for profits, they're targeted. They don't anticipate that you have such strong safeguards in place. So they see you as an easy target to get in. They can go keep your cash virtually, go into your bank accounts, take money directly from there, hold hostage your data. And a lot of us, depending on what your client base is, you have a lot of sensitive information. So it's our responsibility too to protect that information from our clients. And they'll hold it and ask for ransom if you want your information back. So it can also be very, very costly to get this information back. Very costly. We see all the articles that come out when organizations are hit, and now your information is out there, and they're selling your information on the dark web. So it's best to just be proactive in that sense. You know, have these safeguards in place the best you can, and even limiting again use of company assets, particularly with the computers, to reduce that risk. Because once these attacks happen in particular, again, very costly, very hard to get information back once those hackers happen. And next, we'll talk about the unidentified related party and conflict of interest. So again, these conflict of interest isn't only just between, board members and the organizations. It can be between two employees and the organization. We want to know if anyone has a relationship with another entity, especially if you're going to do business with them. Why? Because, if, John Smith, CEO, is the owner, or his wife is the owner of a cleaning company, as opposed to going out there and bidding for services, he's just gonna be like, hey, I have this person, I know, good, great service. Now they're going to charge what may be best for them. There's no guarantee they will charge you at a discount. And now you find yourself being overcharged for services, as opposed to going out there and having that bid, being unaware that it is a benefit for John Smith. Again, with this preferential treatment, because if their bids are coming, a lot of us, a lot of the boards, they've designated again that executive director, the CEO, to make the decision, the final decision after reviewing everything. But if there's that unidentified related party or conflict of interest, they can be biased in their selection, again, to the detriment of the organization. So you really have to do your due diligence there. Um, Same thing with underperformance. All these are tied to that preferential treatment, because if it's a related party, they may not give you the best service out there as they would another client, because they know they have someone within the organization that they could kind of get away with doing things like this. Um, and you can have the contract, you can have the agreement, but again, if there's that comfort, again, that related party, that conflict of interest, they may not honor everything in the agreement. You may have an agreement, the board may review the agreement, everything looks good, you sign off on it, but is it really what's going to be done? So these unidentified related parties can be, a hard thing to hit. Again, if it's not something tied to the individual's name. But again, that's where that due diligence come in, especially as you're interviewing, you're, hiring people for a position. And then, constantly stay up on them, find out if they have any other related party or any entities that is doing work for your company that you need to be aware of. And with that, we're going to go to polling question number 4.
Okay. Question number 4. Smaller organizations do not have risks of cybersecurity attacks. True or false? All right, with about 15 more seconds. 70%, 75. All right, get those last votes in. All right, gonna close it out. 100% said false.
And 100% of you is correct. So this is one of the misconceptions we see sometimes, that smaller organizations feel like, we don't have much to take, so we're not a focus of attacks. But you actually are, because they're anticipating that you don't have a sophisticated system, which will make it easier for them to be able to get in and to, get a payout and leave. So definitely good. Everyone hit the nail on the head. Okay, so go ahead. Got my screen shared. So I do see a question. Actually, smaller organizations usually don't have the resources, yes, to establishing internal controls like the larger ones. But there are still things that can be done out there. Whether there's, I know there's cyber insurance is one. There's also outsourcing to have someone that can do that backup, so that if you do have a breach, that you have someone that can come in and restore relatively quickly and get you up and running as soon as possible, so you don't have a large enough loss. So there are definitely things out there that can be done, that it might not be as robust as a larger organization, but you can still protect yourself. So up to this point, we've kind of went through, like I said, the most common types of areas for potential risk that an organization can see. And again, it's for you to hopefully just have that kind of, what should I look at? What should I consider as I'm trying to see where are my risk areas in the organization? And then once you've identified, well, how can we address it? So for the remainder of the presentation, we're going to go through a couple of examples of things, of controls that can be put in place, things that you should be remembering as you're creating the controls. And then for the risks that we've just recently talked about, which one is addressed by these controls. So the first one we have here is 2 controls listed. One is to require a supervisor and manager to review and approve all costs. And 2 is prior to payment approval is confirmed. Needed a comma there. So again, what you should be remembering as far as these 2 controls are concerned is that the supervisor and managers, they should be approving these. We should have the appropriate level of approval. So if you have an AP clerk or like an AP manager who does inputting of this invoice, well, someone above them should be the person to approve their submission for payment. Likewise, if the submission for payment is the CEO or the executive director, then really a board member should be then approving that. I think what I've seen commonly in a lot of organizations is you will have the CEO or the executive director submit something for reimbursement, but then there's no approval because it's almost viewed that that's the highest level. So not to say that, anyone's CEO or executive director is out there stealing money, but that is still an open area of risk then, because if no one is reviewing that invoice because they're at the highest level, there's still a potential risk that something can be put in that's really not for the organization. And again, something like these 2 steps will cover that theft which we know is also, the use of company assets, whether it be through reimbursement, the credit cards. So having these approvals and then also confirming that you have the approval before paying will help mitigate some of this risk. And also to having good plans and controls in place, they can do two things. One, they're preventative because then they can help you catch a problem before it occurs. And they can also deter anyone from committing these issues because they know that there are these steps in place to monitor and review. So it does two things at once. So moving on to our next example, here we have two controls to restrict access to company data based on job role, and two, to document access allowed, make it part of the person's onboarding or as they change the job role. This is another thing too that, sometimes it's just easier to give everyone in the organization access to everything. Well, that's not really a good thing to do. Access should be limited to what they need to do the job that they've been assigned to do and to complete their task. So you don't want someone to have unnecessary access to information because then that opens up your risk that, they may start just perusing around the information you have there. Now they can see things that really they don't need to see. So it's always a good practice to only give access to the people who need it in order to fulfill their job role. And again, that saves us from theft, use of assets, and cybersecurity. So one of my favorite examples I like to give, I love the movie Venom. And in the very early parts of Venom, we see there that one of the largest conflicts was, here you have his girlfriend that works at the law firm, she leaves her laptop up. That he was able to go in and access all this confidential information because it was up and it was held at home. Now, in a case like that, she needed access to it for her job, but those are the risks too. Like, again, we mentioned people are working from home now, they have company laptops. How many people have a locked office that they keep their laptops in? Or how many people may have their spouse or their kids on their company laptop doing various assignments? Now that they have that, you are not sure who has access to your information. So at least two, by restricting that access, should anything happen, you kind of have a limited pool to go to say, okay, only these people had access to this information. So here we have, again, three controls this time. One, new vendors should be approved at the appropriate level. Background search on all new vendors, and your procurement and three-way matching by using the purchase order, your vendor invoice, payment. All three should be correct for name, amount, address, whatever you have to send, all three should be the same. So things to remember is, some government contracts for you that have these grants, they have a do not use for vendor list. If they're aware that there's a vendor who is not meeting their requirements, they possibly have a list to specifically say, do not use this vendor. So if you have grant contracts, just make sure you are familiar if they do have that list to make sure that you're not utilizing anyone that is on that list. That's part of that background search, especially if you're dealing with a new vendor, to make sure that you're in compliance. And also make sure you have that good segregation of duties. So this is what this covers too, because there might be someone who puts up a recommendation for a vendor. Well, someone else should go ahead and review and approve that person, because also it's a good way for us to, as we have there with number 2, identify any unidentified related parties or conflict of interest. So someone can take that higher level look at the vendor to make sure that everything matches what needs to be done and what's required. And then also too, in always making sure, I know sometimes there's a conflict for smaller organizations because you don't have a very large staff, but really and truly the person placing the order shouldn't be the person inputting the invoice who shouldn't be the person that's paying the invoice, because that is an extreme risk that they can come in then approve and pay something with no proper oversight. So we should always remember to, as we're designing our controls, to have an appropriate level of segregation of those duties. And lastly here, we have, a control to periodically perform a formal cyber risk assessment. We should be testing for, external network penetration, your vulnerability assessment. And then we should also try to look into obtaining and maintaining an appropriate level of cyber insurance. And also to make sure that you have a good policy in place for backing up your records. Like I mentioned earlier, you want to be able to get back up and running as soon as possible, because cyber attacks, they're random and they're constantly changing. So you have to have at least a good IT on staff or a third party that will be able to help protect what you have and stay up to date on what's new that's occurring and coming out. Because again, this hurts with theft, and theft in this case is not always just cash, it is your information, which then now again your client base is going to be impacted by this. And if it gets out, again, damage to your organization, because now they're going to see, hey, our personal information is out there, now we're at risk, now we have to do all of this because the cybersecurity was not up to a certain level. So again, with them, like we've come in, we've done this even as part of our audits that we do, just to review the current cyber environment for our clients. And then we do give recommendations to ways that you and things that you can do, again, for cost benefit, to kind of just boost and give yourself that extra protection. Because I'm not going to say, it's not realistic for you to go and spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars that larger organizations spend in order to have a more secure environment. But there are still things you can do that's beneficial to you. Still costs a little bit, but it gives you that added protection.
Sam, two things. One, I get to that point, and I think the easiest and basic, and I don't think it's that expensive, is cybersecurity insurance. I think at minimum, a lot of our smaller clients, I think, have that as protection. So it's kind of an easy way. And then also a question came in from your last slide, was that, okay, is it a best practice to always obtain a W-8 or W-9 from a vendor, even if the payment will be less than $600?
Yes, I believe it's a best practice for what I've seen, because at the time you start working with a new vendor, it may not be anticipated that it's 600 or more, but should a year it go over 600, you already have that information. Because I think what I've seen very common is that the end of the year comes and then you go through and you analyze to see who you've paid, and all of a sudden you have these new people over 600, you don't have their information. Now you're going out to try to get it in order to file the 1099. So I feel it's a great practice to just, the first time you start working with that vendor, just get it up front. Because some of them too, especially if it was just like a 1-year service, when you come at the end of the year, you may find it extremely difficult to get to them. They're not getting back to you. But if you get that W-9 before you start service with them, before the first payment, they're more inclined to just give it to you. And then you'll have your information and protect yourself. Okay, so I see another one coming here. Who should we contact at Withum to inquire about getting a risk assessment for our organization? So you can reach out either to Amy, myself, or your engagement team that comes in. I could definitely, I know Amy and myself, we can both get you in touch with our digital department, and someone can talk to you. If you already have an engagement team that does your audit, you can definitely talk to them as well. Because like I said, for us, for Withum's policy, we do analyze our clients' cyber environment on every audit, so they will have a good base to start that conversation. Okay. So any other questions? Did I miss anything?
Got them all.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for all those who attend. I forgot, let me go to the last side here. This is the contact information again for myself and Amy. There's a handout in there with a copy of the presentation. So if you have any other questions or concerns, you can email us directly and we'll get back to you. I do see another question. The best way to get the annual W-2 from a vendor. I would say from the time you engage them for a service, just email it straight to them. Like, this is what we need for our records. Most at that time would complete it and get it back to you if you do it early on.
I've had clients where, I've literally told them where they've done, they said, I can't pay you until I have this. Like, our policy is not, to cut a check or pay you. And once you start kind of saying something to somebody and they're not going to get their payment, those forms seem to come in a lot faster at the end here. And, to your point too, a lot of times, they do a DBA name. And I've had clients with the $600 where they'll go and say, oh, it's this. And the next thing you know, you pay them under another name. And then, yet they're the same company, so you'll be able to catch that, usually with those forms too. So definitely best practice. And like I said, just tell them they can't pay without, that's your policy,
Yes.
They get it real quick.
And I did see someone add a comment to that some AP systems require W-9. So that's great. So again, thank you. And like I said, any other questions, feel free to reach out to Amy and myself. And I hope you keep an eye out because we'll have a couple more seminars coming out that you can feel free to join. So thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. There's also going to be a survey at the end. So if you can just take a couple seconds and fill that out, that'd be great. Thank you.